Now it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our speaker. I'd like to thank Farrokh Langdana for being with us today. Farrokh is the Program Director of Rutgers' highly ranked Executive MBA, as well as a well-respected Rutgers Business School Professor of Finance and Economics. He has 10 textbooks to his name. Farrokh has received significant recognition for his teaching, more than 30 awards. At one point, an award he'd received so many times was simply named after him, and even a classroom carries his name. Farrokh's students and colleagues hold him in the highest regard. Much like today's webinar, his presentations in the classroom always incorporate a combination of history and current events, and in today's case, very current events. So Farrokh, I'd like to take over from here and to give our audience a taste of the powerhouse.
Great. Thank you very much, Margaret. Thanks for the very kind introduction. And hello, everyone. I would have loved to say it's good to see you all again, but not so this time. I know I have people from my current classes here who I will not see again for the rest of the semester, which is kind of sad and shocking. And I'm hoping we can meet again in the summer, perhaps. And I know I have people who graduated recently, and I know people who graduated a long time ago, and people who have never had me in class. And this is going to be watched in Beijing, Shanghai, and Singapore, where our executive MBAs are. So the recorded version, that is. So given that there are all these different memories of my course, if you will, I'm going to be operating on a very intuitive level today. And it's going to be fairly disjointed. We're going to go over a sequence of topics because it's evolving so quickly. From morning till lunchtime, there were developments, So, excuse me. And I have allergies, so don't panic if I cough or sneeze. It's just allergies. So we're going to be starting with a quick review. And after that, I'm going to be powering up and discussing some of the rescue plans made by the government. And I've got a list of topics here that I sent you, and I'm going to make sure I cover them all. So hang in there with me. So like I said, the people who are in class with me this semester, just hang in there because you've just seen all this just a few weeks ago. All right, so let's go. And by the way, I missed these. I'm looking at these wistfully. Someone said, what are you going to do with that big tired looking bag of markers? So I've substituted that bag with this one, a little Ziploc bag of styluses or styli. So again, and there are more backups. You know me, the backups of backups again. So, all right, so let's just do a quick review here, folks. I'm going to essentially let's get into the drawing mode here. And if you remember your macroeconomics, and those of you who are seeing this for the first time, please hang in there with me. Here we have the aggregate demand curve of the economy. And here is aggregate supply. So here is inflation, and here is Y, which is GDP. Okay, so at this point, you should be seeing the whiteboard, and I should be in some corner of your screen. Anyway, so this aggregate demand is the total demand for everything in the economy: tanks, guns, planes, software. Aggregate supply is the supply of everything in the economy: tanks, guns, planes, software. And here where they meet is some equilibrium level of GDP. All right. And so back in the day when the economies would collapse, the aggregate demand would move to the left and Y would slow down. It was a demand side story. Essentially a drop in demand. And this is where Keynes came in. And he taught us that we could move these curves out and jumpstart the economy, move this aggregate demand out by increasing government spending or by throwing money in the economy. I'm going to come to that. We're going to talk about the Fed and all the Fed shenanigans, and don't even get me started, but you're going to have to get me started because that's why we're here today, right? And so we're going to talk about G, we're going to talk about M, which is the Fed creating monetary policy, money supply, and lowering interest rates. and tax cuts. So these were the three buttons by which the aggregate demand could be moved to the right, and we could jumpstart the economy and get Y higher. So the output would go up, we'd get out of the recession, and this was pure Keynes, good government spending, infrastructure spending, and then the Fed lowering interest rates by increasing the money supply. So that's what happens. The Fed pumps up the money supply, interest rates fall, and tax cuts. So those were three ways you could move the aggregate demand and jumpstart the economy. What is another situation here is aggregate supply. When the aggregate supply collapses to the left, so here's aggregate supply. This is known as a supply side shock. Okay, so instead of the demand going up, when you have aggregate supply, here is P, here is Y, and these were known as commodity shocks, or as an exogenous, meaning from outside, supply side shock. Old examples were, well, a very old example would be from the Old Testament, actually. Sometimes if I remember, I mentioned this in class. Pharaoh has a dream, and 7 fat cows are chasing 7 skinny cows, something like that, and so on and so forth. And it's a recurring dream. And then Joseph shows up and explains that to him and says, oh, 7 fat, 7 skinny. Oh, it's a supply side shock. But he didn't say that. He said it's an agricultural crisis caused by 7 years of famine and 7 years of good rainfall and then 7 years of drought and so on. And so that was an early example. But conventional examples are oil shocks, some problem in the Middle East. So growing up in grad school, those were the classic supply side shocks or exogenous supply side shocks. Oil shocks, a problem in the Middle East, Gulf oil, Katrina, 9/11, monsoon fails in India, that's a classic one, flooding, that sort of thing. And please understand carefully, and I mentioned oil, I'm going to come back to oil. That's a big one. Oil used to be a supply side guy, but oil went to the demand side when China and India woke up. So just store that away. I'm going to come back to oil. Okay. So, excuse me. Supply side shocks, this is an important point. There's not much you can do. From a macroeconomic perspective, those three buttons here, G, M, and T, not much you can do. I've described supply side shocks as body blows. You just take them. You plan for a drought, you store food, you have a petroleum reserve, which is what we had. And here comes coronavirus, and it hammers our supply chains. So let me talk about the supply chains now. So going back a bit, let's back up a bit. From the year 1990 to 2010, I like to say 2015, actually, was an era that's known as the Great Convergence. There was a book that came out by Richard Baldwin, and that's where the phrase comes from, the Great Convergence. So basically, long story short, the emerging economies of Asia brought their manufacturing powerhouse and converged with the high-tech and technological advancements provided by the West. So the West's high-tech and R&D, the East's manufacturing, converged, and we got these global, hyper-global supply chains. In fact, and I know my supply chain colleagues are watching, and I hope they agree with me. And by the way, you can see my pencil on display, so that'll be useful later on. But the supply chain colleagues will agree that this is when the whole profession was developed. Supply chain came into being in that era from 1990 onwards because of these hyper-global supply chains, the Great Convergence. That started fading. So by 2020, 2015, 2010, according to the author, supply chain started contracting. And some of the stuff started being made in other countries. Some of the stuff started coming back to the US. They started changing too. We started going to intra-industry trade. In other words, instead of us selling jet engines to China and China sending electronics to us, that changed. That was called inter-industry trade. That changed radically. Now it's intra-industry trade. So now mostly 70% of global trade, please note, 70, maybe 60, but it's large, is intra-industry trade, which is A, B, C, and D are all making components for one product made by A. So the Dreamliner, the iPhone. You have 20 countries, 30 countries, 45 countries, all making components for one product made by America, let's say. And so what happens now is when supply chains shut down, it isn't that the China stops sending us calculators and electronics or whatever they used to. Now it's suddenly our own product that's at stake. You know, pharmaceutical companies can't do drug testing because part of the lab testing is done in a certain country. Part of the clinical tests are done in country C, and C has shut down. So that affects country A's home product, you see. So things changed. Supply chains started tightening. Then came the trade war. So supply chains are under more siege. And now comes coronavirus, and supply chains are going to be tighter and coming home as much as they can, coming back to the US, but in the non-union states, not in the right to work states, not in the union states. And I'll come back to that later on. And there is no direct macro core for supply chain. Here is an important point. In this case here with coronavirus, it is the social distancing and the staying at home or the sheltering at home or whatever euphemism you want to call it, the home quarantine. Basically, it's a very important point. To fix coronavirus, you damage the economy. If you remember your microeconomics, the opportunity cost of reducing the transmission of coronavirus is slowing down economic growth. It's not either or. This is what you have to pay. You shut down consumption. So let me take you into another equation. So just store that away. And please note, this could be one reason why the federal government, of course, we're talking incompetence and you're talking behind the curve and all the mixed signals. But subconsciously, they have to understand that the more effectively they fight coronavirus, the faster the economy slows down. And the faster the economy slows down, perhaps the less their chances of getting re-elected. So there is an inherent bias, in my opinion, please note. Oh, and there's a disclaimer. Everything I say today is me, not Rutgers or the executive MBA program, all right? And so there is it's truly truly being on the horns of a dilemma, a macroeconomic dilemma. The more efficiently you fight the virus, the faster you slow down your economy. So store that away, and I'm going to show you the next expression here. And delete this. Okay, so here is Y, this is output, is C plus I plus G, just hang in there with me, plus exports minus imports. And I'm sorry, folks, for the handwriting. It looks like I'm about to pass out here, but I'm not. So here we are. So this is GDP, domestic output. So let's use this feature here, spotlight. So this is GDP, domestic output. And these are the components. This guy, this one here is the biggest one, private consumption. And let's spend a few minutes. This guy is 70% of the GDP, 70. Private consumption is 70%, the largest of any country. This is capital investment. This is borrowing by companies. How much Bristol-Myers Squibb, how much AT&T would want to borrow for capital investment? It's capital investment. It's not stocks and bonds. It's new plant, new equipment. Housing is in there. This is government spending. These are exports and these are imports. So the size of the pie is comprised of what we spend, what our businesses spend, what government spends, and global trade. All right, so our situation coming into the coronavirus, let's go back out of the spotlight here to the pen. This baby was hammered by the trade war, imports. There was a trade war. They hammered our exports. The Chinese did it very carefully. They nailed wherever the big tariffs on American exports. And by the way, please note, the trade war is not over. It's not even close to being over. It's not even diminished. 75% of the big tariffs are still there. There's a sense out there, from these talking heads on TV, oh, now that the trade war is diminished. No, it's very much there. It's just a spin of some weird kind. 75% of all the big tariffs are there, and the ones that have been cut back are like the piddly ones, all right? So the Chinese hammered our exports, and they did it very carefully. And they nailed exports our exports with 40–45% tariffs only when they had substitutes. So when they could go to Canada or Argentina or Brazil for soybeans or wheat or whatever, or pork, they hammered us. When they needed our stuff, the tariffs on those things, and when there were no substitutes for our stuff like avionics and microprocessors and things like that, they only had a tariff of 3%. But anyway, imports down. So let's go back to my spotlight. Imports down, exports down. This baby here, capital investments, has been a flatliner for a long time. Companies have been sitting on cash, and I'll tell you more about that. But in my opinion, since 2001, capital investments have never really taken off. And we will see that that has to do with investor confidence. And one thing or another has hammered in. I'll talk about the liquidity trap in a few minutes. So that's gone. This one, dubious. And I can't do dots on the screen, so that a small square means a dot. G, government spending, there are plans for it. We are still building a wall. So out to lunch. Long story short, this one here, this is what's been keeping us alive, private consumption. Now you know where I'm going with this. Not just us, but the rest of the planet. This has happened before. So here I was when I saw that Germany had slowed down and gone into recession, and Japan had slowed down and gone into recession. Europe was out of action. And this was wavering, when consumption was wavering, that's when I decided to get out of this whole story many weeks ago. So this was the only guy powering us. So we have a 4-engine plane, and that's the one engine, private consumption, 70% of our economy keeping us alive. And that is what we are slowing down now. Distancing, no professional sports, no going out to eat, no traveling, no tourism, no cruises. So that baby, the one engine that was sputtering, is now, so here's a plane. We had one sputtering engine keeping the plane aloft. And now to fight coronavirus, we are shutting the sky down. So we actually are dumping the fuel from that one engine, you see? So hence the sharp slowdown, hence the rapid slowdown in GDP. And here is this expression, consumption. Let's click on consumption in this case, literally maybe. Consumption is C bar plus 0.9, and that's a decimal point, Y minus T plus 0.2 times W. Okay, so that's the consumption function, and let me talk about that. And again, why is this important? Consumption is 70% of our economy. When that baby goes, we go. All right, so C bar, this one here, that's consumer confidence. The thing with consumer confidence is once it collapses, it's very sensitive. Once it collapses, it stays down for a while. And needless to say, that C bar has been hammered. Y minus T, that's our after-tax income. 0.9 here, that's known as a marginal propensity to consume. So basically what that means is that if our after-tax income goes up by $1, consumption goes up by 90 cents. This is the largest of any country on the planet. And that 0.9 is a cultural thing. It's a generational thing. It's baked in. This is wealth. Stocks, bonds, housing, stocks. So, and that is the sensitivity, 0.2. So again, if wealth falls by $1, consumption will fall by 20 cents. So consumption is a function of the wealth effect, as it's known, after-tax income, and consumer confidence. So there are three components to consumption, which is 70%, and which was sputtering, and which we now are shutting down quickly to combat the virus. And please note, this shutting down of consumption is happening all over the planet. So you see, I'll take you there and connect this to the price of oil. All right, so wealth has taken a beating, and I want to make a comment here. We're having, obviously, a negative wealth effect, I think today too. This baby is going down in terms of stock prices, and we will see what the run-up was earlier. But this 0.2 is very interesting. There is a development there. Back in the day, which is 3 years ago, this was a small number. You know, consumers were more sensitive to after-tax income, 0.9, as opposed to wealth, 0.2. Because wealth was stocks would go up and down, market would be up and down, and that wouldn't mean that we would change consumption that frequently, up and down, up and down. So it was only 0.2 times. What some researchers have found recently, just a few months ago, just last year, is that this is asymmetric. So back to the pen. So this number is asymmetric. So what we find is that as wealth increases, as the stock market goes up, 0.2 remains 0.2. But when wealth has been found to fall, 0.2 has gone up to maybe 0.4, maybe 0.7, 0.6, we don't know. And so there is an asymmetry. So consumers are treating collapses in wealth, and there's more research to be done. This is very new. People are wondering aloud. There's a bunch of studies that will come out, a bunch of people who will get their PhDs from that, I'm sure, And so as wealth increases, nothing changes. People kind of ignore it. Consumers do. As wealth collapses, suddenly the negative effect is disproportionate. It's an asymmetric sensitivity to wealth. So the sensitivity goes up as wealth collapses, but kind of remains the same as it increases. So they're taking falls in W more seriously than increases in W. And if that's true, then that's not good news for us right now. Okay, so store that away. And so I've told you now why consumption's falling, and it has to. And let's erase all these drawings. It has to. And so let's now look at I. So we have I, so we had Y is equal to C plus I plus G. Let's forget the foreign sector for now. Let's look at I. This is borrowing by companies. I is equal to I bar minus 0.5 times the interest rate. Okay, so this is borrowing by companies, and this is the Fed story. So I'm transitioning now into the Fed story. So here we are, stock market at an all-time high, and the many reasons. Some of you in my class have seen this and heard this many times, but we were doing quantitative easing, and I'm not going to get into all that again. In 2008, we basically bailed out all the bad boys and girls who were caught holding the rotten mortgage-backed securities, and Uncle Sam bailed them out. And the euphemism was called quantitative easing. It was massive, buying all the junk bonds, buying all the mortgage-backed securities and printing money, basically. 48 billion for 7-8 years, 48 billion a month for 7-8 years. It fell to 24 billion in the latter part, but huge bailout. It was unprecedented, needless to say. And I used to rant and rave until finally the movie The Big Short came out and I was vindicated. And then one of the 4 people who did quantitative easing wrote in the Wall Street Journal, and it's a great article. It's called Confessions of a Quantitative Easer. And the person's actually a Rutgers fellow, by the way. And he says, I'm sorry, Main Street, I sold you out. I bailed out Wall Street. So anyway, we bailed them out by printing incredible amounts of money. Store that away. That money has to go somewhere. Why was there no hyperinflation? Because that amount of money was gigantic, gazillion trillions. I don't even know, 30 trillion, I'm not even sure. Why no hyperinflation? Because that money just sat there. Remember, folks, for a hyperinflation to happen, that money that's printed, ridiculous amounts of money printed, have to be spent. That money has to go into the economy. It didn't. And I'm going to tell you why right now. And it was a miracle of sorts, because otherwise we would have had massive inflation. So here we are, folks. This is the Fed's equation. This is the DNA. This is the basic DNA equation of the Fed. If the Fed lowers interest rates by increasing the money supply, look at this expression, capital investment should go up, because simply it's cheaper to borrow. And this is what Milton Friedman taught us. He said, whenever there's a crisis, you throw money in the economy. Whenever there's a liquidity crisis. Now remember, Friedman was talking about the Great Depression, when there were runs on banks. Friedman's words have been misconstrued, misunderstood over and over again, even in 2008, and I'll never forget Anna Schwartz in her 90s then, gently scolding Ben Bernanke, and saying, it's in the Wall Street Journal, just look up Anna Schwartz and Ben Bernanke and it'll pop up. And just say, Ben's a nice young man, very polite, something like that. But he misunderstands Friedman. You don't throw money randomly every time there's any kind of crisis. It's only when there are runs on banks, or if there's like in 1987, there was a massive run on institutions when the stock market plunged, and the Fed increased liquidity by 19% that week, those 2 days. But, and here's the point, over the next 2 weeks, once the crisis was over, they sucked back the liquidity. They took the money away. They didn't just leave it there, as opposed to 48 billion bailing out all the bad boys and girls who are stuck with those mortgage-backed securities. So here's the equation. To increase borrowing, the Fed lowers interest rates. And it's known as jump-starting the economy. It's cheaper to borrow, and so capital investment goes up. What's happened since the subprime crisis is that the massive amounts of money really didn't jumpstart the economy. We went from 6%, to 2%, or maybe even lower. Nothing happened to this. And here's another big takeaway, and many of you know this well, I'm hoping, is that look at this guy here. If I bar investor confidence is also low, then you can lower interest rates till the cows come home. Nothing will happen to capital investment. It cancels it out. And I bar is the key. And Keynes warned us. Keynes talked about C bar and I bar. He called them animal spirits. He said, look, if animal spirits are low, you can't do a darn thing. Not in so many words, but that's what he said. And so I bar is low. We've had trade war. We had before that excessive regulation, before that excessive taxes. Now we have coronavirus, then the shenanigans in Congress, and Trump's daily ongoing drama. I-bar had a little uptick when corporate tax rates were cut, and I'm going to take you there. But I-bar is hammered right now. And so here's the point, folks. You can lower interest rates, but if I-bar is also low, it cancels out. Nothing happens. And this is known as a liquidity trap. Liquidity trap.
Farrokh, we have a couple of questions that are relevant
Yes.
to what you're talking about. Are you ready to take some questions?
Sure. That's good, actually. Please
Okay.
fire away.
All right, good. I've been sending them your way to a certain extent, but I will.
Totally focused on the board.
Yeah, well, I understand completely. But I'm going to read a couple to you if that's okay, so that. And here's one about, liquidity crisis, which is what prompted me to, jump in here. So the Fed has announced they'll inject liquidity. M and I is near zero. Still, the mortgage rates for consumers is way high. When can we see the drop in mortgage rates? Are MBS getting bought?
Yeah, so actually that's the only good thing that's coming out of all this is refinancing. And refinancing has gone mad right now. Rates have fallen. So I don't know where you're looking, but 30-year rates have fallen. Last few days, what's happened is there's been an anomaly in the long bond. Okay, 30-year rates have actually dipped up a bit because people are cashing in their bonds. There's a huge cash crisis. So people are cashing off their bonds and decreasing the supply of loanable funds at the 30-year level. But just give it a few days, the 30-year rate will go down again. Massive amounts of global capital are pouring into this country right now. And I call this the cave theory, and many of you know that. When the whole planet is in trouble, all the different countries are hiding in their own caves. And our cave, if you will, is the safest. So we were getting massive amounts of capital inflow even before this corona thing happened. About a year and a half, we're getting capital flooding in here from China, interestingly, and from Europe too. So no, good time for mortgage refinancing. There's a last couple of days is a little weird. The long end has popped up, but the capital inflow will push it down. So that's one good thing that's going to come out of it.
Okay, good. So I have another question, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's take one more and then get back on track. Thank you.
Okay. I have to decide between these two that I had in mind, but I'm going to go with this one. You suggest I has not recovered since 2001. What role do you think productivity, efficiency growth, or the perception or expectation of the same might be inhibiting corporate America from investing in building stuff? They continue to think we can accomplish more with less? Question mark.
You know, the whole productivity question is a huge question. And we had the perfect ecosystem when Netscape browser happened. People are tired of hearing me talking about the perfect ecosystem when Google and Netscape browser happened. And the big question now here is productivity and innovation in the United States. The thing is the lower tax rates. That was, I'm going to try and be fair here. The tax cuts were a step in the right direction, the Trump tax cuts. But the thing is, again, for the income taxes, it was a welfare plan for billionaires. Okay, in the Northeast and West Coast, we got hammered. Our taxes went up. So I guess I don't know. And in terms of corporate taxes, here's the big difference. When Reagan cut corporate taxes, that was done against a backdrop of confidence. You know, Reagan brought hope. Whether you like Reagan or don't, whether you think whatever of Reagan, he brought hope to the table. You know, the shining city on a hill and all that sort of thing. He brought people together. He was a unifier in many ways. I'm speaking relatively with what we have right now, of course. Trump has done the opposite. You know, he has not brought hope. It's the politics of fear. I-bar is dead. He's hammered I-bar, he's hammered C-bar. It's the politics of fear and the politics of division. You know, there's one president who said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall. Another president who's deploying the army to build a wall. You know, we are in the middle of the desert, God knows, spending bad G out there. So tax cuts only work against the backdrop of high C-bar and high I-bar. They don't work automatically. And so Trump's tax cuts they misfired. There was huge share buyback. And I'm thanking you very much for this question. There was a huge share buyback. I got some numbers here. Apple, 64 billion. Qualcomm, 34 billion. So these companies got these massive tax cuts and they sat on them or they bought their own stock. And their executives laughed even louder. You know, with their bonuses. Back in Reagan's time, there was a surge in productivity. There was a surge in labor force participation at the high level. Most of these low unemployment rates we had, they were bogus. Almost 40, I'm tempted to say 55% of the new jobs created in the Trump era were really low-paying jobs. You know, $20,000 to $45,000. So all these low unemployment rates. In Trump's time, women burst into the workforce in mostly decent jobs. There was an increase in the participation rate and the tax cuts kicked in. They did not misfire and productivity happened. So those buttons didn't work this time. And again, thank you for the question, because that also explains, in addition to the liquidity that was generated, that explains why stocks were overvalued and why the stock market was just crazy. You know, the share buybacks pushed up the stocks even more artificially. And so getting back, so here I am, the day I heard that, okay, so everybody gets the liquidity trap. Now we have interest rates at 0, and it's not going to make any difference. Liquidity trap, you can lower interest rates till the cows come home. If investor confidence is also dead, you took your few remaining bullets and you wasted them. You just shot them into the woods. You're out of ammunition. Okay, so much for that. I'm going to erase this. And somebody reminded me of this Great Depression story. When we did the Great Depression, it was, I think, Mihir Choksi from my current class. And he reminded me, and so just a quick anecdote here. So it's the Thursday of the stock market crash. I think it was the 25th. It was a Thursday. And 1:30 in the afternoon, the market's crashing, and a gentleman called Dick Whitney, who was the vice president of the New York Stock Exchange. So the House of Morgan, which was across the street from the exchange, so a bunch of bankers met at 12:30, and they said, Dick, you got to go to the floor and you got to save this crash from happening, so that, because the crash has been now in progress. So 1:30, Dick Whitney goes on the floor, and this is classic drama. In a huge booming voice, he buys 10,000, I think it was, of US steel at a price higher than the market. And then he goes to the next post, and 20,000 American Harvester or US Steel or Standard Oil or whatever, and 50,000 of this. And people are clapping, and some actually break down, and the market stalls. It stabilizes. And so he saves the day. Dick Whitney saves the day. And the House of Morgan and JP Morgan did exactly that in 1907 in the banking panic. He walked around in a booming voice. He brought C-bar up. He bought. And people said, oh, if JP Morgan's buying or Dick Whitney's buying, well, that's okay. And then comes the Monday, and then comes the Tuesday, the 29th. And the market again starts plunging. And they send Dick Whitney out again. They said, go do your thing, go, go, go. And so there he goes, and he tries the same thing again. And you can see for a few minutes, the market stabilizes, and then wham. In other words, you can't press that button over and over again. You know, AT&T lost 50% that day. I got some numbers here somewhere. I think RCA went from $188 to 20 cents and no buyers, and on and on. So when that happened, when the Fed made the announcement and the market just stabilized for a few seconds and started collapsing in the face of all the massive cuts in interest rates, that story comes to mind. Okay, can I take any other questions?
Wow, we have a lot. I had one on quantitative easing, which of course is a favorite from that article that you presented to us a couple of years ago in the mini MBA. Let me see if I can find that. Can quantitative easing or pressing the interest rate button help when C-bar is so low?
No, so we just talked about that. No, it's not, and it's the Fed's playbook from 2008. You know, these guys have dusted off a playbook from 2008, where it was the banks who were caught with their pants down, so to speak, holding all these rotten mortgage-backed assets, and they were bailing them out. They were just. I'll never forget. Excuse me, and you heard the story, many of you. One of these tycoons was in my office. I'm not going to give you any more details, but he was laughing his head off, saying, I thought I was going to go under, Professor, and Uncle Sam's going to bail me out. What a great country. And that's when I woke up and said, okay, you know what? I got to look into what's going on here. So that's when I got involved in all this. But no, short answer, no. It was a faulty playbook in 2008. It's an even faultier playbook. What the Fed can do, getting ahead of myself here, is allow unemployed. You know, now 1 in 5 households is experiencing job loss. Somebody sent me something just a few minutes ago. 1 in 5 households from this Corona episode. And so what the Fed can do is make it easier for unemployed workers to tap into their unemployment insurance. Don't have them wait a week. Don't have them show they're looking actively for another job. Everything's stalled out now. So make it easier. So in other words, instead of throwing large programs and gazillion trillion dollars around, it's better to have well-focused programs that are executed well. You know, there's so many programs out there, but the poor people who need them have no way to know where they are, how they can access them, excuse me, whether they qualify or not. So starting with the unemployment insurance, they can do that. Let me just transition to how will we pay for all this? You know, just today, $2,000 per family, 500 billion, 1 trillion. And so the answer is something that, yes, Bernie Sanders and Alicia Ocasio-Cortez, and I think Elizabeth Warren too, have talked about. It's modern monetary theory. And guess what? Uncle Sam, the Trump administration, is happily doing that. They're just not calling it that. And so MMT is a scary thing. Let me, excuse me here, folks, while I just.
Farrokh, you hit your
Sorry.
microphone mute. There you go.
I'm back. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So MMT, modern monetary theory, very interesting and kind of scary. Very simply, back in the day when you had a budget deficit, when G minus T, government spending was larger than tax revenues, you could borrow to fund it. And we especially can borrow. We have this incredible privilege, you know. The Europeans call it an executive and an exclusive privilege that we have, and they resent it, as they should. We are one of the few countries that can do it. We can borrow from others. And there was a point when the deficit GDP ratio, so G minus T divided by Y, deficit divided by GDP, was greater than 5% back in the day. It meant the deficits were non-sustainable. What it meant in plain English is, excuse me, that you, over that point, you wouldn't be able to borrow from domestic and foreign residents anymore. You know, it was non-sustainable. So that's what my first book was about. Over 5%, all the red lights would come on because people would stop lending to this country and we would print money like crazy and we'd have a massive hyperinflation and horrible things. Fast forward to the subprime crisis, and this baby was almost 10, well, it was over 10%, 10%, maybe even 12%. I mean, it's never been so high. And nothing happened. We printed money like mad people. You take all the Argentinians, all the Argentinas, Brazils, Mexicos put together. We printed more money than all of them put together ever. And nothing happened. I remember June Carlin in one of my alumni, executive MBA alumni events, and she said, Farrokh, where's the hyperinflation? Nothing happened because fortunately, and miraculously, I should say, C-bar and I-bar was low. And when C-bar and I-bar is low, the printed money sits there. And if it sits there, you know, back in the day, there was something called velocity. Some of you remember when it changes hands. That term isn't used much anymore. So there's no velocity, you know, it just sits there. There is no inflation then. There is no hyperinflation. So we printed money and got away with it. Got away with it. The sky didn't fall on our heads. And here we go. Now comes Bernie and AOC earlier, and they're trying to use this as policy. Hey, I'm going to pay for college education by using modern monetary theory. Well, first of all, it's not modern. Secondly, it's not a theory. You just got away with it last time. You're going to try it again. And pay for the green jobs. Print money. So the role of M, monetary policy, is not to jumpstart the economy anymore. M has lost its mojo. The Fed has lost its mojo. M doesn't work. Liquidity trap. So it can't jumpstart, it can't soft land. It's just there. And so now the role of M is to be subservient to G, government spending. It just prints money that the government can't borrow. So the government spends that much, they can only borrow that much, and so the difference is M. You just serve G, you print money to make things work. And we are America, we have green pieces of paper that everybody wants. It's called the exorbitant privilege. Now I remember. The Europeans call it the exorbitant privilege we have. And so MMT, and I like to call that circumstantial macro. You know, in law, you have circumstantial evidence, and my dear friend and colleague, Professor Louis Kerman, I know is watching from California. So Lou, I hope I got this right. I call this circumstantial evidence. You know, the thief broke into the museum. He was wearing a green jacket. You are wearing a green jacket. You are wearing a green jacket. And so therefore you are the thief. You broke into the museum. Circumstantial. The thief broke into the museum on Wednesday, so let's put maximum lights and security only on Wednesday, and let's prevent robbery. Circumstantial. So here is circumstantial macro. if you will. It worked last time. We printed like crazy, and somehow there was no inflation, and they have no clue why. We now know. It just sat there. And some of it went in the stock market. Some of it, not as much, went in housing. Um, in some countries, it sat at the central banks, and the central banks are telling the local banks, hey, don't park your money here. We are charging you negative interest rates. You need to pay us to park your money here. Go out, lend it to the people. That's what negative interest rates are. It's a parking fee to get the money out from the central banks and lend it to the people, by the way. So we dodged a bullet last time, and this is how it's part of policy. Will it work? Yeah. As long as C bar and I bar remain low, and that money that's printed just kind of sits there. Never thought I'd say it, but now if confidence suddenly revives and we wake up and the money is printed, then we'll see inflation, massive. But so this is a gamble. It's circumstantial macro, and this is how the Trump administration is paying for the $2,000 or $2,000 per family and the 2 weeks, whatever, medical time off from work and various. Tomorrow there'll be 5 more new plans, but that's how they're going to pay for it.
Farrokh, we actually have a question about what advice you would give to President Trump to get the economy back on track.
Okay, so macroeconomic advice, you mean? I have others too, but macroeconomic.
We'll stick to the macroeconomic
absolutely.
advice.
Gotta be professional, right? so the first one is you can't do M. Well, he's done M. And in his world, it's that simple investment function I wrote, and 90% of the people out there have this 1-to-1 ratio. Lower interest rates, the economy jumpstarts. Raise interest rates, the economy slows down. I bar is missing from the story. Okay, so tax cuts take too long, and the payroll tax cut is not going to help the people who are unemployed. So what he can do right away is take the high road. And I've said this in my blog, and by the way, folks, if you're interested in more detail, just do Langdana blog page on Google, Langdana blog page, scroll down to the very first one, that's my website, and then scroll down and you will see all my blogs. So just go from Langdana blog page to my web page, and then they're all there. There were 2 good ones. There were 2 from a few days ago. What they should do, what Trump should do, is he and Xi Jinping should get in front of the cameras. They should both hold in their hands the trade war documents, just a stack of papers. Nobody really knows the difference, right? And tear them up, high drama, and say, we are now working together. There is a time for a trade war. There never is one, by the way, but this works. There's a time for the trade war. There is a time for working together, because we now need to work together as brothers and sisters, the usual stuff, and tear up the trade war documents. There'll be a real C bar and I bar boost. It will help, because that trade war really was a headwind that came for no reason. It was supposed to fix intellectual property violation by China. It never did. And the victory or success of the trade war would simply mean going back to where we were before it. It was an absolute publicity stunt, sadly, and we would have had much more traction. The economy, by the way, is in better state than it was in 2008. The companies, corporations have more cash. The banks have better capital. The capital is better. The collateral is better. Unemployment rate is lower, even though it's not as low and as good as the Trumpists make it out to be, but it is there. Jobs were coming up. Wage growth was there, but again, main reason for wage growth at the low level was that minimum wages in many states have been cut, and that's caused wages of low income earners to go up. So the Trumpists are taking credit for that, but it's the minimum wage really that's been relaxed. So, but nevertheless, we are in better shape than we were. So the first thing, tear off the trade document. And the second thing is just design programs that are focused. The execution is more important than the size of the dollar amount. And body blows, supply side shocks are body blows. Sadly, there are no quick solutions. The supply side model, in terms of the Reagan, Angela Merkel, European Central Bank model, where you jumpstart an economy with deregulation, and Reagan's and Trump's done some of that, corporate tax cuts, which misfired for Trump. But the whole supply side story is a long-term story. You know, it takes a couple administrations for it to sink in. It's a structural story. The Keynesian story is moving the aggregate demand, and there are some quick buttons, but those buttons are horrible and useless when C bar and I bar is down. Okay, so let me just move on here, folks. So we've talked about modern monetary theory, and I'm getting close towards the end, and I'm going to take some questions too. But this is how we're going to pay for it, MMT, and it worked. The sky didn't fall on our heads. It's circumstantial macro. And we're going to try it again. We're already trying it. This is how we'll pay for everything. And please understand, so what's happened here is the slowdown here is going to be multiplied many times, because the same shutting down of C here, let's clear the board. One comment I want to make before I move on. So the C here in the US, which is going down, is coinciding with C going down in all over the world, in Germany, Iran, in India and China, because that's the only way you can shut down the virus, is by shutting down its transmission. So what you have is a massive global shutdown of private consumption, and which in many countries was already low. In our case, it was low and stuttering, and now it's shutting down more. There's a strange comment in my description about Winston Churchill. I'm going to transition to that. And Churchill, Pearl Harbor, and COVID-19. And of course, you know, if there's a Langdana presentation, there's got to be some semi-weird historical story. So, so here we are. It's the night of Pearl Harbor, and Churchill's actually having dinner. And by the way, I'm not a great fan. He was not a friend to India at all. The Bengal famine was largely caused by him diverting money, diverting food to the war effort. But nevertheless, this is a good story. So Pearl Harbor has happened, and he's having dinner with the US ambassador and the US special envoy, interestingly, Averell Harriman, FDR's special envoy to the UK. And the butler brings in the news that Pearl Harbor has happened. So Churchill calls FDR and he says, so what's all this about Pearl Harbor? And of course, FDR confirms. And the Americans, of course, race off to their offices. And his wife, Clemmy, comes out from back in there and she says, my gosh, this is horrible news. And Churchill is laughing and smiling, and he's ebullient, you know, he's on top of the world. And she says, are you mad? Haven't you seen? It's devastation. And he goes, I'm actually not mad. I know tonight I'm going to sleep the sleep of the saved and thankful. And what he meant really was that he was looking at a long-term socio-global geopolitical sort of thing. America was going to be in the war, and with us in the war, they could not lose. We had our tanks, our guns, our planes, our money, our capital, our ingenuity was coming on board fully now, and the Allies could not lose. So he was going to sleep the sleep of the saved and thankful. And at the risk of sounding insensitive, I want to go out on a limb and say that this COVID-19 may be a major reason for our supply chains to come back home in a significant fashion. You know, I mean, I have been the manufacturing worker in this country, excuse me, got shafted. We outsourced too much. We offshored too much. There is a blog I wrote in 2016 that starts Angry Americans, and it got me a lot of attention. It was before the election, and I pointed out that these are good people. You know, they're not whack jobs. And so much of the stuff we sent overseas should not have been sent. And, you know, I have seen the dark side. You know, I've actually done manual labor. I've worked with these guys for many months, cutting trees in Virginia. It's many years ago. So I've seen the dark side. And these are good people. These are the people who will actually give you the shirts of their backs. And I have been a fan. I've always worried about them. And this may be the beginning of supply chains coming home. They may not know it, but unbeknownst to them, the blue collar manufacturing worker may be sleeping the sleep of the saved and thankful in the days to come. So you've heard it here first. Not being insensitive, I'm just doing a very long-term socio-economic, political, geopolitical approach thing to supply chains. Should I take a question or two now? Because, or should I do my ending, Margaret, and then do some questions?
So, your preference entirely, Farrokh.
Okay, so you know what? Let me just do my ending, and then let's take some Q&A. And if we go over, I'm fine. I'm here. Okay,
Okay.
so thank you. So how to end this? So let me just quickly run through what we've done. You know, we started off with me doing a quick review, and I showed you the supply side shock and demand side policies and how they're different. Then I pointed out that fixing coronavirus, restricting C was really at the same time. It wasn't an either or, it was both. It would restrict economic activity. They went hand in hand. And hence the government doing the restricting, doing the social immobility, the travel restrictions and so on, cutting consumption was perhaps hurting its re-election chances and so on. Then I described the run-up in the stock market, the causes for that, the massive liquidity that was created, the buybacks, and I almost forgot, we started doing quantitative easing again last October, by the way, 8 billion, 8 billion, 8 billion. Now, of course, it's going to be gigantic. And so massive run up. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention is I knew the day that the Baltic Dry Index hit an all-time low, hit a low, was the same day that the S&P 500 hit an all-time high. That's the day I knew that something was very wrong with the valuation in S&P 500 in the stock market, because the Baltic Dry Index, it's an index that comes from 1744. It comes from the Virginia and Baltic Coffee House, in London. And that's where the captains of ships would meet to decide what the rate for the daily rate for renting the ships was. And today the BDI is a great index for those of you who want to look at what's happening on the planet. Real economic activity. This is the cost of renting a ship for bulk cargo. So iron ore, wood pulp, cement, copper, infrastructure spending. A typical price of a ship is $150,000, but in 2008 it fell to 4,000, 150,000 to 4,000. So the Baltic Dry does not lie. Okay, so when that hit a bottom and S&P 500 hit a maximum all-time high, I said, okay, you know what little there is in the market, I'm out, because it's making no sense at all to me. So keep your eye on it, look it up. It's a great index that nobody's heard of. It does not lie. You have to be careful. Sometimes if, say, China puts in 20 more ships in the water, that might affect the prices. It's an identification issue. But aside from that, it's a very stable index. So we talked about the valuation of the stock market. We talked about the correction. Then we talked about the recovery methods, liquidity trap, massive money, and more money is coming. And it's all going to be for nothing as long as C bar and I bar is low. We then went on to modern monetary theory, which talks about how we're going to pay for all this. And we're doing it now. It's not a Bernie Sanders thing. It's a Trump thing. We're doing this now. And then the Churchill story. And how do I end all this? So there's a student in my executive MBA class who's going to graduate in under 2 months, and it's Dr. Eric Rubin. He's a research scientist in a large pharmaceutical company. And he sent me back part of an email that I had sent the class, and he said he really liked what I had written. And I thought, you know what, this would be a good way to end this session. So what I wrote was that, countries, companies, individuals, families, universities should be judged not in bull markets, but in bear markets. because in bear markets or bear times or bad times, that's the true measure of a person. In a bull market, we're all great. Everything's good. We're all happy. That's the last bagel. You want that bagel? Oh, no, no, you take the bagel. It's the last bagel. No, you take. No, everyone's great in a bull market. In a bad market, our true colors come out. A bear market separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls. And what I wrote in the message was that as being all of us here are part of the Rutgers community in one way or another, here in Singapore, in China, globally, with all our alums. And so at this time, let us show the world how we as members of the Rutgers community can handle and cope and transcend these bear markets with decency and grace and fortitude, because that's who we are. And thank you for listening to me today. Welcome to the Powerhouse. Thank you.
Farrokh, you can't see me, but I'm applauding, and I'm sure many in our audience are. That was a fantastic presentation. Our webinar today was really unprecedented, with somewhere around over 500 people participating, and that has led to roughly 100 questions. So some of them are similar in nature, or some of them, you began to address things. I know we won't get to all of them, so tell me an area that you want me to focus in, kind of hone in on, and I'll try to find the questions in that from that area.
Excuse me, let me make sure it's on. Margaret, do you see many of them or a bunch of them hitting the same theme?
There are some. Why don't I know you talked a little bit about the fact of giving the individuals money from the government and things like that. But there was a question here that's asking about kind of that too big to fail concept and giving monies to bail out corporations. And we've seen that before, so I want to see if this is...
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And, can I be unprofessional and for a few seconds, and I'm going to my Bernie Sanders mode, because here you have airlines. Okay, I'm going to fly off the handle again, as in my typical fashion here, just like Bernie. Is airlines are getting massive bailouts. They're asking for massive bailouts. Now, airlines have been doing really well for the last 20 years. They've been gouging us. They've been fawning over us when we are in business class. Do you want more whipped cream on the top? How about some more whipped cream on the side of your sundae? You know what? I'll come back later. That sort of thing. Or treating us like animals, worse, cattle in the economy. No food on the long distance flights, bags being charged extra, And so on one hand, I'm going, the heck with it, because what you have in these situations is taxpayers bail out these companies. I'm getting into Bernie mode. Taxpayers bail out these companies. They recover. They may pay back their loans, but the benefits accrue to their shareholders. So here I'm reading about this bailout plan this morning, and there's a little clause in there that somebody inserted that for the airlines, that while this bailout is in progress, it is understood that executives of airlines will restrict their compensation increases. And I'm going, increases? Are you kidding me? So that's my tantrum there in terms of bailouts. Bailouts have to be done very carefully, because you have to make sure that you don't get into the typical insurance scam thing. Like some people they have bumps and dents on their car, then they get into an accident, and then they tell the insurance company all those bumps and dents came from the accident, and they want to be covered for that. So if a sector is failing or under stress, then no, they should not be bailed out. Only sectors that were healthy and solvent should be bailed out, and with strict time limits and strict clauses in there to prevent their executives from just ripping off taxpayers again.
Yes, it sounds familiar to the automotive bailouts and things of the past. That rings very familiar.
Sorry, Margaret, I just want to make a quick comment about oil prices. I didn't get to that. As I showed you, oil was a supply side story. You remember that first diagram I drew. So it was a supply side story like that. But what's happened when India and China woke up is that oil became a demand side story. So when they woke up and they started driving and there were cars on the roads and industry took off, oil became a demand side story. And so when you have this China and India slowing down, rest of Asia slowed down, oil prices collapse. And so when the oil prices fell, they're down to 30 today, Brent oil, that was a proxy. It's not a supply side story. It's not something in the Middle East. Now it's like the Baltic Dry Index. It's a proxy for slowing economic activity. And I mean, look at the pollution. The pollution levels down 88%. So the emissions are down. Now this is of coronavirus, but basically the cars are off the road. But that's what happened when oil fell. There was another signal that the global economy is slowing down, and bang, people decided to sell on top and get out of the stock market. I forgot to make that comment. And a related comment, the Russians wanted to cut back the supply of oil, so move the supply curve back here and artificially push up prices. The Saudis did not go along, and really, not because they had any benevolent feelings towards the US, not the Saudis, no. It's at the fracking. Saudis love it when the oil prices collapse because that shuts down our fracking. And so they didn't join in with the Russians. There was a disagreement, and bang, oil prices fell. Fracking is gone, shut down again, and the market collapsed after that. So there's a little blurb I wanted to get in there.
I'm glad you mentioned that because there is a question specifically about that I think you just checked off my list here.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. If the U.S. does go through a 1-month shutdown, as was someone proposed, with the government covering the wages, what are the implications of that, and then trying to actually restart the economy?
Yeah, thank you. The big concern is that, okay, there'll be a cure for coronavirus, perhaps. So there's going to be a massive spring back. They'll listen to me and tear up the trade war documents and make a big drama about it. There'll be a spring back from that. But, I am not sure that we shouldn't go back to where we were. We were overpriced and overvalued in the markets. So that's from me. That's personal. I'm sure my finance colleagues may disagree with me. They might, but I would not want to go back to where we were. So that's that. But what I'm concerned, or not actually not concerned, but I'm not sure of, is whether our behavior will permanently change, whether we will reach another lower plateau, if you will, of global travel and economic activity and conferencing and tourism, because it was a frenetic planet. People who normally travel twice a year were traveling 6-7 times a year. So it seemed to be in super fast forward. So I'm not convinced we may get back all the way. We might settle down to a lower plateau of consumption activity, and that might actually be a good thing, I'm thinking.
Kind of a new normal for us.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't have put it better.
Yes.
I couldn't have put it better. New normal.
Yeah.
Now keep in mind, you're talking to a guy for whom an exciting evening is a history book and solitude and a cup of tea,
And a cat.
And a cat. No, the cat's sadly gone.
Oh. Okay. Did you want to take any more questions, or do you want me to? I can send all the question log to you to see. There's definitely more than we could possibly answer.
So
today.
how many people do we still have on, Margaret? Can you tell?
I can tell. There's
378.
Yeah,
Okay.
378. Yeah.
Wow. So let's go on for another 5 minutes.
Okay.
The people
Okay.
are there.
Perfect.
They're giving us the time, and let me answer as many questions as I can.
Okay. Well, I'll just put it out there that there have been a number of greetings to you. There was a funny comment that said, now that you have advice for President Trump, how do we actually get it to him? And someone who said, in all capitals, why aren't you on CNBC every day? So those are some of the ones that I'll just put out there. And just trying to scroll through, see things that you have kind of addressed in comment already. Will the consumer demand, clearly consumer demand for some products has fallen but risen in other areas. Will the demand in these new areas of be enough to offset the industries that everything that's happening is causing to fail?
I'm sorry, I honestly don't know the answer to that. You know, there is something called hysteresis in macro, which is defined many different ways. It's like a momentum. And remember that 0.9, that's the marginal propensity to consume, which I said was baked in the consumption function. So let's kind of, that does not change. That's really baked in. So C is C bar plus 0.9 y minus t. So we had this 0.9 here. And so even after 9/11, that number did not change. It was 0.88 actually. It went up to 0.9. So in terms of spending and consumption, that baby is baked in. In other words, if there's a $1 increase in income, we will still spend 90 cents, especially in this country. But aside from switching from one set of goods to another, I honestly can't tell. I'm not qualified to. Regarding the Trump question, all politics aside, he's really on the horns of a macroeconomic dilemma. And I'm trying to be professional here. The more efficiently he fights the virus, the greater his chances of not making it in the election, because it's going to hurt economic activity. So truly on the horns of a dilemma that way.
No. Farrokh, there are a number of questions that are seem to be around will small businesses survive, and kind of advice for the small business and for the individuals. We've talked quite a bit about kind of the large corporations and the previous bailouts and things, but a number of questions about small businesses and individuals surviving all of this.
Yeah, so let's do an anecdote here. We have a place in Virginia. Many of you might have heard this story, and so we used to go there. Don't go there much now. And there used to be a Wrangler jean factory making Wrangler jeans, and it went out of business many years ago. And there were all these programs that maybe state, federal, I don't know, had in place for all those displaced workers. Learning how to code, data entry, call center, whatever. But there were newer kind of jobs. And so I ran into some of them. And I asked them, so yeah, you guys going to sign up for that? And they said, what? They had no idea. So then I went to the local information office and I spoke to the lady there and said, they have all these programs for all those guys who were laid off, and they had no idea. And then she shocked me. She said, "Oh, what programs?" She had no idea, and she was part of the local information bureau, unemployment, whatever. And so the point I'm making is, and as Barry Carafin, who teaches strategy in the executive program, repeatedly says, and if he's listening, I'm to shout out to him that, anyone can come up with a great strategy. Anyone. It's the execution. Paradise lies in the execution. And that's the boring, mundane part where you drill down and figure out who is going to tell whom and how will they know. And if we have jobs for these displaced workers, these new collar jobs, which I have been talking about, you have white collar jobs, you have blue collar jobs, and now you have new collar jobs where you have people with manufacturing skills and mechanical skills working to learn about robots. And because, you have to wait 15 months if you have automated equipment now. There are not enough people to service it. And so You know, if you want to go for training, it's a 6 month, it's a 6 week course, it's a 2 month course sometimes. But how will you get to the course? Who will watch the kids while you're at the course? You know, where will you stay? Will you have enough money to pay for travel back and forth? Or should we have a bus taking all you guys to the course in North Carolina for 2 months? Those are the details, you know, and paradise is in those details. It's the execution. Just throwing more and more money and out there and creating bureaucracies to manage the money, which you need to do, takes time and it's inefficient. So for small businesses, that's what I would do. You know, focus on how do you get the message to them,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just make an announcement and walk away from it.
Okay. Here's another one. We talked about bringing our manufacturing and things back to this country. We had outsourced, so much. But what does that mean for the global economy? And what are there any negative effects that we would inadvertently have because of doing that?
You know what? What's happened is the tide has turned everywhere. So we've gone from this whole world of globalization to nationalism, protectionism. Um, it's the sign of the times. Maybe we overdid the globalization. I just can't put my finger on it. Um, but we did overdo it. We just ran it into the ground. And look at my blog, Angry Americans. There's a whole detailed thing on there. And so that high tide is over. It's gone. And what we have here is that, well, when we bring stuff back, the people who initially lost that kind of job, lost that kind of service or skill, they are not the ones who will get the job when it comes back. It'll come back in a newer form. It'll be a version that needs automation, needs robotics, that needs more technical skills. So, and 9 people will do what 25 used to do. So when they come back, they're going to come back in another incarnation, if you will, you know, and all over the world. And there will still be globalization. Please understand, globalization will happen. I like to say that globalization is like water flowing downhill. It will happen no matter what. But the rampant globalization, you know, the unremitted globalization will be cut back. That's all I'm saying. It will have. It has to happen. And remember, it's intra-industry trade. So now the world. Why do you think that the Chinese are hammering us with soybeans and pork and wheat and sorghum? Because there are very few all-American products, you know, anymore. So agriculture is all American. So it's not like, oh, they're being strategic, they're hitting Trump's base. No, well, maybe, but that's a pure all-American product. You know, pork is pork, the pig is American. Okay, you know, and so it's intra-industry trade. The big capital-intensive trade today is in 40 countries working together, and that's not going to change.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, why don't we make this question be the last question? It's
Okay.
a very classic Langdana question. Do we still have the best cave?
Yes, absolutely, and mercifully, yes, we do, because every time there's a global um, convulsion somewhere, guys like me with trembling fingers get our Wall Street journals, hard copy, mind you, not online, and we look at what's happening to long-term interest rates or treasury rates, and we see them going down, and we see the dollar getting stronger. There's a major convulsion in some country, dollar gets stronger, rates go down. It means capital has flooded in. It means people have dumped their local currency and they're buying our dollars so that they can buy our bonds and park the money here. That's why the dollar gets stronger. And so, um, except for once when the Tunisia thing happened, we did not see money coming into this cave, and I still can't figure that one out. Money has flowed in every time. So we still have the cave, but I want to caution that the shenanigans are not helping. We need a government that's inclusive and works with the rest of the planet. This response to COVID is a global response. And it's obvious now that we can't go it alone. We have to work with the rest of the world. And so we need an inclusive government where it brings us all together, you know, instead of fragmenting us in 9 or 10 different groups and pitting us against each other. And so one hopes for that. But the cave still exists in spite of that. I mean, there's leaking, there's some plaster falling from the roof, but it's still intact.
Yes, and there's a comment a little bit further down that I just saw that said, yeah, even though our cave is good, everyone still wants cash under their mattress.
Oh yes, talk to Ben Soprancetti, cash is king. So yeah, pull out $500 from your ATM, just keep it at home. Why?
So, well, Farrokh, since we've known each other since I took one of the very first mini MBAs way back when, that you're one of my favorite people to hear speak, and we could go on and on, but we'll close things today. We'll thank everyone, for joining us. It's been a really enlightening experience, and I just wanted to thank everyone, so many people, for joining us on such short notice because this was such a timely topic. And for everyone who is here, I just want to remind you that this was a special presentation due to the extenuating circumstances in our universe these days, but most of our webinars are part of the RBS Virtual Lunch and Learn series, which take place monthly. And we try to make that easy for you to remember by consistently scheduling them in the middle of each month, the middle of the week, and the middle of the day. For more information, you can always visit our webpage, which is business.rutgers.edu/alumni/lifelong-learning. And we have an exciting schedule of topics and presenters already lined up for the next several months, but we'll continue to be responsive to world events with special presentations such as today's. But please stay with us for just one more moment. We have a very brief 3-question survey about today's event. Finally, I mentioned at the beginning that we're recording this session, and we'll send a link of the archived recording to everyone who registered, and we'll post it on our social media as well. So thank you, Farrokh. Thank you, everyone, and be safe and stay healthy.